At Changping, an account written by Sima Qian more than a century after the event claims that Qin General Bai Qi ordered more than 400,000 surrendered Zhao soldiers killed. The exact number is disputed. The consequence is not. Zhao was broken, clearing Qin's road to unification. Yet only 15 years after Qin united China, the dynasty itself was gone. How could a victory forge an empire and still fail to make it last? From Qin's ruins rose Xiang Yu, who took the title Hegemon-King of Western Chu. He never wore the imperial crown, yet Sima Qian gave him a place in the basic annals, the pages normally reserved for those who had ruled the realm. The same chronicle records more than 200,000 surrendered Qin troops killed at Xinan under his command. Xiang Yu won battle after battle, yet lost the realm to Liu Bang, a former minor local official. Violence could seize the realm. It could not teach the realm to obey after the killing stopped. So what survived every collapse? And why did every contender believe the broken map had to become whole again? To answer that, we have to rewind, before the conquerors, before the philosophers, before the first emperor, to the moment when people along these river valleys first started imagining a shared political world. The earliest cultures along the Yellow River and the Yangtze were not one people with one story. Archaeology shows us dozens of Neolithic communities, each with its own pottery, its own burial customs, its own relationship to the land. Later Chinese tradition would reach back into this period and find legendary rulers, the Yellow Emperor, the Sage Kings, and above all, Yu the Great, who supposedly tamed a catastrophic flood and founded the Xia dynasty. These are powerful historical traditions, not verified facts. A major outburst flood along the Yellow River around 1920 BCE is a genuinely intriguing archaeological discovery, but it is not proof of Yu or the Xia. What it does tell us is that floods shaped both the landscape and the imagination of the people who lived here. The memory of water threatening everything, and a ruler who could stop it, became one of the oldest stories about what legitimate power was supposed to do. What archaeology does confirm, with real force, is the Shang dynasty. Excavations at Anyang have given us a royal city, a sophisticated bronze industry, organized warfare, and elaborate royal tombs. And they have given us something even more striking: oracle bones. Shang priests would carve questions onto animal bones or turtle shells, apply heat until the bone cracked, and read the cracks as answers from royal ancestors. Some of China's earliest surviving writing records, kings asking the dead about war, harvests, weather, and whether a royal birth would be fortunate. Writing began here as a tool of ritual power. But here is the thing: writing is more durable than any king. The language that the Shang used to question their ancestors would survive the Shang themselves and carry Chinese civilization forward through everything that came next. The Zhou replaced the Shang around 1046 BCE, and to justify that replacement, they developed one of the most consequential political ideas in human history. Heaven, a moral force, not quite a personal god, granted the right to rule to virtuous kings. Disaster, corruption, and successful rebellion were not random events. They were signs that heaven's mandate had moved. Good governance proved the mandate. Catastrophe proved it was gone. The Zhou created this idea to stabilize their own rule, and in doing so, handed every future rebel a moral vocabulary for overthrowing any government in China's history. Every dynasty that followed would claim the mandate. Every rebellion that succeeded would announce that the old mandate had expired. It was a theory of political legitimacy so flexible that it made change feel inevitable and reunion feel righteous. The Zhou world eventually fractured into competing states, and what followed was one of the most productive periods of political experimentation in human history. The Spring and Autumn period gave way to the Warring States era, roughly 5 centuries of intensifying conflict between kingdoms that were simultaneously laboratories of administration, philosophy, agriculture, and military science. States learned to count their populations, register households, conscript mass armies, move grain across long distances, forge iron weapons, deploy crossbows, and use cavalry. Confucius, Mencius, Laozi, Han Feizi. The philosophers who would define Chinese thought for millennia emerged precisely because the old Zhou order was collapsing, and everyone was trying to figure out what should replace it. Competition sharpened everything. Qin was not the most cultured of these states. It was the most administratively ruthless. It applied legalist ideas, clear laws, strict punishments, rewards for military achievement, household registration, state control of agriculture, more thoroughly than anyone else. And that machinery produced Changping. The battle itself lasted years. Zhao's army was eventually encircled, its supply lines cut, its commander killed by Qin crossbowmen. When the survivors surrendered, Sima Qian later claimed that Bai Qi ordered more than 400,000 prisoners killed. The exact number cannot be verified as a modern body count, and the method remains disputed. But the moral weight of the event was never in doubt to the people who remembered it. Changping was not merely one cruel general's decision. It revealed how states that could count households, move grain, conscript entire populations, and sustain vast armies for years had transformed warfare itself into something almost industrial. Zhao never recovered. The road to unification ran through that field. In 221 BCE, Qin's king became the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, and the world changed. He abolished the old feudal kingdoms and replaced them with commanderies administered by appointed officials. He standardized the written script, weights and measures, currency, and even the width of cart axles so that roads could be used uniformly across the empire. He built roads and began construction on what would become the Great Wall, though most of the wall visible today is actually Ming dynasty work built nearly 2,000 years later. He also began building his mausoleum, a project Sima Qian attributed to 700,000 laborers, including the famous terracotta army, thousands of life-size clay soldiers buried to protect him in death. The ambition expressed in that tomb tells you everything about how the first emperor understood his own power. He had not just conquered the realm. He believed he had ended history's cycle of division permanently. He was wrong. Forced labor, brutal punishments, crushing conscription, and court manipulation after his death triggered rebellion almost immediately. Qin's second emperor was a puppet. The empire that had taken centuries to build collapsed in 15 years. And into that collapse stepped Xiang Yu, the warrior who seemed destined to rule everything. At the Battle of Julu, he broke the main Qin army. Then, at Xin'an, the Shiji records that he had more than 200,000 surrendered Qin soldiers killed. The generals were spared. The men were not. Xiang Yu could terrify opponents into submission. What he could not do was build a coalition that wanted to stay. He burned Qin's palaces. He parceled the empire into kingdoms for his allies. He ruled through fear and spectacle, and he alienated almost everyone who might have helped him hold it together. Liu Bang understood something different. He was not an aristocrat. He had been a minor local official, ordinary by every measure the old world used to judge men. But he could delegate. He trusted Han Xin to command his armies, Xiao He to manage his supply lines, Zhang Liang to plan his strategy. He kept much of Qin's administrative geography without preserving all of Qin's severity. He made the conquered feel that the new order was livable. Qin failed as a dynasty, but succeeded as a blueprint. Xiang Yu inherited its violence. Liu Bang inherited its state. The Han dynasty that Liu Bang founded lasted, with one interruption, for about 400 years. Its rulers retained Qin's administrative map while softening and legitimizing it. They promoted Confucian learning as a framework for governance. They built a civil service that rewarded education. They taxed grain, managed frontiers, opened the Silk Roads, and fought long, expensive wars against the Xiongnu nomads to the north. And here is what makes Han so significant. The label itself outlived the dynasty. The majority ethnic group in China today still calls itself Han. The script used to write Chinese is still called Han characters. The dynasty became an identity so durable that it absorbed its own collapse. But success at that scale creates its own problems. Land concentrated in the hands of powerful families. Court factions and eunuchs competed for influence over emperors. Military governors accumulated power that the center could no longer control. The larger the system became, the more power it placed beyond the emperor's reach. By the 2nd century CE, the empire was fracturing from within. The Yellow Turban Rebellion of 184 CE accelerated the collapse. Warlords carved up the north. 3 major powers emerged: Cao Cao in the north, Liu Bang in the southwest, claiming Han legitimacy, Sun Quan in the southeast. This is the era that later generations would call the Three Kingdoms, and it is worth pausing here, because there is the historical Three Kingdoms, and there is Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a novel written more than 1,000 years later that turned these decades of institutional ruin into one of the greatest moral dramas in Chinese literature. The novel's version of events is not reliable history, but the real era produced something almost as interesting. The rivals disagreed bitterly over who should reunify China, never over whether reunification was desirable. Even in collapse, the idea of a unified realm remained the only legitimate goal. And one more fact worth noting: Cao Cao, the most powerful man of his era, never declared himself emperor. His son Cao Pi did that, ending the Han and founding Cao Wei. The father understood that claiming the mandate too openly might cost him the allies he needed. That instinct, to govern through legitimacy rather than raw power, was something Xiang Yu never learned. The brief Jin reunification that followed the Three Kingdoms lasted less than 40 years before the War of the Eight Princes tore it apart. Northern China fractured into a series of conquest regimes, many of them founded by peoples from the steppe: Xiongnu, Xianbei, Di, Jie, Qiang. Chinese aristocratic families and millions of ordinary people migrated south into the Yangtze Basin, bringing their agricultural techniques, their texts, their administrative traditions, and their ambitions. Buddhism spread and transformed, finding new forms in both north and south. These centuries are sometimes described as simply chaotic, but their consequence was decisive. The south, once a peripheral region, became economically central. A future unified China would depend on southern agriculture, southern commerce, and the southern population in ways that Han China never had. Armies broke the map, but refugees redrew the civilization beneath it. The Sui dynasty reunified China in 589 CE, and like Qin before it, it lasted barely a generation. But also like Qin, its infrastructure outlived it. The Grand Canal, connecting the Yellow River in the north to the Yangtze Basin in the south, was the Sui's most consequential achievement. It turned the migration of centuries into a permanent supply system. The Tang dynasty inherited that connection and built one of the most cosmopolitan empires in the world. Tang Chang'an was a city where Central Asian merchants, Buddhist monks, Zoroastrian priests, Nestorian Christians, and Japanese students all moved through the same streets. Tang power drew on frontier soldiers, on Silk Road trade, on religious diversity, and on a civil service examination system that, at least in principle, opened government to educated men regardless of birth. The Tang also produced one of history's most striking legitimacy experiments. Wu Zetian, a former imperial consort, became the only undisputed woman to rule China as emperor in her own name. She built her support through the Buddhist establishment, through aggressive use of the examination system to recruit officials loyal to her rather than to aristocratic families, and through effective administration. Her reign was controversial then, and has been debated ever since. But the fact that it was possible at all reveals something important. Even an unprecedented ruler had to speak through existing institutions. Power without legitimacy, without bureaucratic support, without a framework that made authority legible to the governed, That kind of power did not last. What ended the Tang's golden age was a frontier commander named An Lushan. In 755 CE, he launched a rebellion that shattered the dynasty's center. The registered population of the empire fell from roughly 53 million before the rebellion to under 17 million afterward. But that collapse reflects war, mass flight, loss of territory, and the breakdown of tax registration, not simply deaths. The empire survived, but it never fully recovered its former coherence. Regional military governors, Jiedushi, who had been empowered to protect the frontier, now held power the center could not take back. Tang expansion had empowered the men who guarded its edges, and Lushan showed what happened when those men decided to march inward. After the Tang fragmented into the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, the Song dynasty reunified most of China in 960 CE and built something extraordinary. Song China was, by most measures, the most economically sophisticated civilization on Earth at the time. Its cities were larger than any in Europe. Its civil service examinations were more rigorous and more widely accessible. It developed printing with movable type, improved agricultural techniques, organized maritime commerce across Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, and pioneered the use of gunpowder in warfare. And in the 1020s, the Song government issued the world's first government-backed paper money. Merchants had been using private paper receipts, and the state formalized and expanded the system. Money light enough to travel as paper. The idea alone tells you how far Chinese commercial life had developed. And yet, the Song faced a problem that none of its economic sophistication could solve. It was surrounded by powerful military states, the Liao in the northeast, the Western Jia in the northwest, and eventually the Jurchen Jin dynasty in the north. And it could not match them on the battlefield. The contradiction reached its most humiliating expression in 1127. Jin forces captured Kaifeng, the Song capital, and carried away both the reigning emperor Qinzong and his retired father Huizong. 2 emperors taken. The dynasty survived because the court reconstituted itself in the south at Hangzhou, and commerce and culture continued. But the lesson is sharp. Civilizational sophistication, fiscal innovation, and battlefield security are 3 different kinds of strength, and having one does not guarantee the others. Song China invented money light enough to travel as paper, but could not make its frontiers light enough to defend cheaply. The southern Song held on for another century and a half before the Mongols arrived. Kublai Khan's forces were unlike anything China had faced before, a military machine that had already conquered Central Asia, Persia, and Russia. The final act of Song resistance came at Yamen in 1279, where the last court made its stand aboard a fleet. According to the dynastic histories, when defeat became certain, official Liu Xiufu carried the young Emperor Zhao Bing into the sea. A child ruler, the last symbol of a dynasty, disappearing into the water. The image is almost unbearable. The Song died defending a dynasty. The Yuan dynasty that replaced it did not merely interrupt Chinese history, it inserted China into a vast Eurasian imperial network stretching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. Trade, mobility, disease, and administrative ideas moved across that network in ways that permanently changed the world the Ming would inherit. The Ming founding in 1368 was both restoration and reinvention. The Hongwu Emperor, himself a former peasant who had survived famine and rebellion, rebuilt state control with a ferocity that reflected how much the collapse had cost. His successor, Yongle, moved the capital to Beijing and launched the most spectacular maritime enterprise of the age. Between 1405 and 1433, Admiral Zheng He led 7 voyages into what the Chinese called the Western Oceans. The first expedition alone consisted of hundreds of ships and nearly 28,000 people according to Ming records, a fleet so large that it dwarfs anything Europe would send to sea for another century. Those voyages reached Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and the coast of East Africa. They were diplomatic, commercial, and an expression of imperial prestige on a global scale. Then the Ming turned inward. Border defense, fiscal constraints, and shifting court priorities ended the voyages. But closing the sea lanes did not mean isolation. Private maritime trade and global silver continued to flow, and the empire faced a different kind of threat on its land frontier. In 1449, the Zhengtong Emperor personally led a campaign against the Oirat Mongols and suffered a catastrophic defeat at Tumu. He was captured, the Son of Heaven, taken by nomads on his own frontier. The court's response was remarkable. It enthroned his brother, organized the defense of Beijing, and refused to be paralyzed by the capture of the emperor himself. The dynasty could survive the physical loss of its ruler because the state had become larger than any single man. That is how far Chinese institutions had come since the days of Xiang Yu, when one warrior's personal charisma was the only thing holding a coalition together. But institutions could not save a dynasty from everything at once. By the early 17th century, the Ming faced fiscal collapse, a series of devastating famines, and the growing power of the Manchu in the northeast. In 1642, the rebel Li Zicheng besieged Kaifeng, the same city that had once been the Song capital. During the siege, the Yellow River dikes were breached, whether by the defenders trying to stop the rebels, by the rebels trying to flood the defenders, or some combination of both. Historical accounts differ on exactly who acted when. The result was catastrophic. The city was destroyed. Traditional accounts suggest something close to 300,000 people died, though that figure should be treated with caution. A river turned into a weapon to save a city that could not be saved. The dynasty that built walls to control the frontier and used a river to protect its own people could not rescue a state crushed by fiscal crisis, famine, and Manchu expansion. In 1644, Beijing fell. The Ming emperor hanged himself on a hill behind the Forbidden City. The Qing dynasty began. The Qing was not a Chinese dynasty that happened to be founded by Manchus. It was a Manchu-led, multi-ethnic empire that governed different regions through different institutions, ruling Mongols differently from Han Chinese, governing Tibet differently from the northeast. At its height, it was the largest Chinese-ruled empire in history, stretching from Central Asia to the Pacific. Its population grew dramatically, its internal trade flourished, and its scholarly culture produced encyclopedias and literary collections of enormous scope. For most of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Qing was one of the wealthiest and most powerful states on earth. Then the 19th century arrived with a kind of compounded crisis that no dynasty had faced in quite this form. The Opium Wars and the unequal treaties they produced were real humiliations, but they did not happen to a healthy state. They happened to a dynasty already straining under population pressure, administrative decay, and ecological stress. The external shocks accelerated internal collapse. And nothing in the 19th century reveals that collapse more starkly than the Taiping Civil War. Hong Xiuquan, a man who had failed the imperial examinations multiple times, came to believe after a fever vision that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. He built a heavenly kingdom centered on Nanjing, mobilized millions of followers, and launched a war against the Qing that lasted from 1850 to 1864. Estimates of the dead range widely, but scholars generally place the toll at around 20 million or more, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The Qing survived partly by empowering regional armies led by men like Zheng Guofan, whose forces finally crushed the Taiping. But survival had a hidden price. The dynasty had won by handing military and fiscal power to provincial commanders. The center that survived the rebellion was weaker than the center that had faced it. The 20th century began with the Qing trying to reform fast enough to survive and failing. And then, in October 1911, in the city of Hankou, a bomb being assembled by revolutionaries exploded prematurely. Police discovered membership lists and plans. Conspirators faced arrest and acted before they were ready. The Wuchang uprising spread, provinces defected, and within months, the last Qing emperor, a child, abdicated. 2,000 years of imperial rule ended not with a grand final battle, but with an accidental explosion and a cascade of defections from a system that had already lost the will to hold itself together. The bomb alone did not cause the revolution. It was the spark inside a structure already weakened by reform failures, military discontent, fiscal disputes, and the collapse of legitimacy. The mandate of heaven was gone. The struggle to define legitimate unity had survived it. What followed was not peace. The Republic of China fragmented almost immediately into warlord territories. The May 4th movement of 1919 generated a new generation of intellectuals demanding a different kind of China, modern, scientific, free of what they saw as the dead weight of tradition. The Nationalist Party and the Communist Party both emerged from this ferment, both promising to reunify and modernize the country, and both eventually going to war with each other and with Japan simultaneously. The Long March of 1934 to 1935, in which the communist forces retreated thousands of miles under nationalist pressure, became the founding myth of a movement that would eventually win. The monarchy had vanished. The ancient problem of who had the right and capacity to reunify the realm had not. Japan's invasion, which escalated dramatically in 1937, forced a temporary and uneasy alliance between the nationalists and communists. In 1938, the nationalist government made one of the most devastating decisions of the war. Facing rapid Japanese advances, they ordered the Yellow River dikes near Huayuankou breached to slow the enemy. Hundreds of thousands died, and millions were displaced. The Japanese advance was slowed, but the cost fell almost entirely on the Chinese civilians who lived in the flood's path. Call back to Kaifeng in 1642. Almost 3 centuries apart, political authorities turned the same river into a weapon, sacrificing communities to buy time against an enemy. Geography remembered strategies even when dynasties did not. The Civil War resumed after Japan's defeat in 1945, and in 1949, the Communist Party under Mao Zedong proclaimed the People's Republic of China. The nationalist government retreated to Taiwan. For the first time in over a century, the mainland was under a single authority. But the new government's ambitions went far beyond restoring order. Land reform dismantled the old rural hierarchy. Campaigns reshaped industry, education, and cultural life. And then came the Great Leap Forward, launched in 1958, a program of rapid collectivization and industrial production that set targets so unrealistic and punished honest reporting of failure so severely that when harvests collapsed, the information needed to respond never reached the people with the power to act. Tens of millions died in the famine that followed. Scholarly estimates vary, but the scale is not in serious dispute. It was not a natural disaster. It was a policy catastrophe made catastrophic by the suppression of truth. The Cultural Revolution, launched in 1966, added a different kind of destruction. Mao mobilized young Red Guards to attack what he called the Four Olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. Schools closed. Intellectuals were persecuted or sent to labor camps. Temples, libraries, and artifacts were destroyed. But the deeper damage was to the institutions that had always carried Chinese civilization forward: education, professional expertise, the transmission of knowledge across generations. A movement mobilized to break the old cycle ended up attacking the very mechanisms by which Chinese civilization had survived every previous collapse. The paradox is almost too sharp to be accidental. If you have been watching this far, you are exactly the kind of person who would love our other videos on ancient empires and forgotten civilizations. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. And drop a comment below. What do you think allows a civilization to survive across thousands of years? Is it territory, institutions, language, shared memory, or something else entirely? We read every comment, and the best answers might just shape a future video. The reform era that followed Mao's death brought industrialization, global trade, and one of the most rapid economic transformations in recorded history. Hundreds of millions of people moved from rural poverty into urban life within a few decades. New infrastructure connected regions that had always been difficult to govern. The questions that have always defined Chinese history. Who holds legitimate authority? How do you govern a territory this vast? How do you keep the center and the periphery in balance? Did not disappear. They took new forms. Return now to Xiang Yu, standing at the height of his power after Qin and Han, with the greatest army in the world and no idea how to govern anything. And return to the heroes of the three kingdoms, Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Zhuge Liang, whose real historical tragedy was that they turned an era of institutional collapse into a lifetime argument about legitimacy and the human cost of restoring order. They became immortal, not because they won, but because the questions they fought over never stopped mattering. China's continuity did not rest in one dynasty, one border, one capital, one ethnicity, or uninterrupted unity. It rested in reusable institutions, administrative systems that a new ruler could adopt without rebuilding from scratch. It rested in a writing system that carried memory across centuries of political change. It rested in infrastructure, canals, roads, granaries that connected regions even when governments failed. It rested in a political language that made legitimacy transferable, so that every new contender could claim the mandate without having to invent the idea of legitimate rule from the beginning. And it rested in the recurring belief, held by rulers and rebels alike, that fragmentation was a crisis to be solved, not a condition to be accepted. Perhaps China's longest tradition was never unity itself. It was the refusal to accept division as the final chapter.